Welcome back to our third day of the reductive fabric drawing. The things that you're going to need today is going to be that little gray eraser. It's a Prismacolor kneaded eraser. You're going to need your compressed charcoal stick and one of the tortillions from your pack of materials. Make sure that when you use the tortillion, you use the side, not the tip. When you use this side, it tends to blend. If you use the tip, it gets sucked back in. So only use the side today when you're using that tortillion. Today, we're going to be focusing on putting in the brightest highlights and then the darkest values. The brightest highlights will be taken out with our kneaded eraser. The darkest values will be put in with our compressed charcoal and blended with a tortillion stick. Begin your drawing today with the kneaded eraser. The great thing about this eraser is that it actually absorbs the charcoal into itself, so it doesn't actually leave any of those little tidbits that the Staedtler eraser does. Because it absorbs the charcoal and doesn't leave anything behind, you can actually press really hard and scrub back and forth like we couldn't do with the Staedtler eraser. With this eraser, I want you guys to pull out the brightest, whitest, lightest values that you see in your reference photo. You can even mold the eraser to a point or a really skinny edge to better match the area of value that you need to erase. So I have this really tiny skinny line right there on the edge of my fabric. So I'm pinching that kneaded eraser to a really skinny point, and then I'm dragging it across my drawing to only remove the charcoal and that small amount of area that the kneaded eraser is touching. As we did yesterday, you can use a scrap sheet of paper to help get a nice crisp contour along the edge of your fabric. I'm using the kneaded eraser for this again, but you can still use your Staedtler eraser if you need a more sharper point. Another great quality about the kneaded eraser is that it's going to be absorbing pigment, which will ultimately dirty the end of the eraser that is touching the paper. So it gets to a point where there's so much charcoal built up on the end that you can actually start using it as a blending stick and not using it as an eraser. So that's something that you can continue to think about, where once you get the end of your kneaded eraser kind of clogged up with charcoal, you can then use that same end to help blend and transition your values into one another more accurately. After defining all of your edges with the kneaded eraser and erasing away the brightest highlights that you're seeing with the kneaded eraser, you can now move on to deepening the darkest values by using your compressed charcoal stick and the tortillion to blend. The compressed charcoal makes a really dark mark, so you want to begin in an area that is the darkest spot within your photograph. Press lightly, follow the contour, and make really nice, light, smooth marks that are closer to one another to where there's a darker value. And as the values get slightly lighter, increase the distance of your marks away from one another, while also simultaneously pressing lighter with the compressed charcoal stick to help make a lighter value mark. Once you've applied the compressed charcoal in the area that needs to be a darker value, you can take this side of your tortillion stick and begin blending the compressed charcoal into the background. Resist the urge to scribble that tortillion back and forth. If you do that, you're going to be getting these really awkward ends and little lines throughout your entire dark value section. So after you make a stroke, you need to lift up the tortillion before you make a second one. Never keep it fully on the paper and rubbing it back and forth. And once again, it's very important to use the side of that tortillion. If you would put the tortillion point down, all of that paper is going to get sucked into itself, and then you won't have a blending tool anymore. It'll just be a stump. So make sure you're using it where you're applying the tortillion, where the side of it is hitting the charcoal. Do your best to blend that compressed charcoal into the background so you get that nice smooth transition. I recommend cross-hatching over your lines like I'm doing here to where you're getting rid of the direction the compressed charcoal was drawn in, and that will better help smooth the compressed charcoal into the background. Continue adding in compressed charcoal to better match the value, but also to help you with your transition of values in the darker value sections. If any area in the dark value sections got a little too dark, don't hesitate to use that kneaded eraser to lighten up any values that you're seeing. You can also begin using that dirty tortillion stick to add in darker values in your more middle to dark sections within the fabric folds. This is great if it's only going to be used for like very subtle, darker value transitions. So you can see here on this part of the fabric, there's a little bit of a core shadow. A core shadow is the area on the object that receives little to no light. So I'm only going in with maybe the lightest stroke I could with that compressed charcoal, and then I'm using my dirty tortillon to blend that compressed charcoal while also adding little subtle amounts of that compressed charcoal into that core shadow area. And then I'm going back in with that kneaded eraser to modify my values. So a lot of this is pushing and pulling that charcoal into your composition. In sections of your drawing that are only like a middle to dark value, use the compressed charcoal moderately. Don't go heavy with it. Only put a few subtle marks, and then use that dirty tortillon to blend that charcoal together. And that dirty tortillon is also going to be applying extra pigment in addition to the compressed charcoal. So less is more when you're using compressed charcoal. And even here, I'm not even going in with the compressed charcoal to define this edge. I'm just going in with that dirty tortillon to modify the contour or that edge of the fabric more specifically. You can even make a little swatch of the compressed charcoal on the side of your board. Dip and rub your tortillon into it, and now I'm using my tortillon as a drawing tool, a tool that I am transferring small amounts of this compressed charcoal into my drawing so I have better control. The biggest thing you want to stay aware of is making sure you're not using the compressed charcoal and creating outlines around all of your fabric folds. Remember, outlines tend to flatten your objects. You want your values to define the edge of a form. So even though I started with an outlined line to define the contour of that fabric fold, I'm going back in with marks that are drawn in very lightly, put far in from one another, and then I'm using my tortillon to blend and get rid of those outlines. Any outline that is still too apparent after blending can be removed with my kneaded eraser. Look at the difference putting in dark values makes to the drawing. If you compare the bottom half of this drawing to the top half, the bottom half looks way more realistic and three-dimensional because we're seeing a fuller range of values. I'm being cautious to make sure I don't have outlines that define the contour of every folded form, but I'm letting the values define the edge. And as you work on adding in these last darker value details around your entire fabric drawing, remember to use that tortillon to add in those little tiny fluctuations of darker values inside the folded fabric. Once you've analyzed your photograph and you've made sure that all of your values and their transitions match your reference photo, you can take away the masking tape very carefully. Just make sure that as you rip it away, you're going slowly and you're pulling it away from the drawing itself. It's going to leave you with this beautiful clean border, and your drawing is just going to get a facelift. It's just going to look so much more professional and amazing. And there you have it. When you finish your reductive fabric drawing, take a picture of your work and submit it into Schoology, and come back for more tomorrow.